Okay, so this video is going to be about my probably my favourite literature module for the whole year. I had the opportunity to pick and study Holocaust literatures. It was an incredibly impactful module for me to take, and it was very eye-opening. We looked at a range of Holocaust literature, which included memoirs of survivor accounts, perpetrator fiction, so fictional stories from that kind of encompassed perpetrator viewpoints, which was The Reader. Elie Wiesel's Night was one of the memoirs we read, and The Search Warrant, which is a trying to figure the right term, but it's a what's the term? My mind has gone blank. It's kind of almost like a historical research, not an autobiography, but it's like a piece of research that Patrick Modiano carried out to try and find out what happened to a young Jewish teenager in France who went missing, called Dora Bruder. And it's kind of, I used it for one of my assignments along with Night, and I was really happy with how it went. I picked a question to do with do you think that Holocaust literature should play a part in Holocaust commemoration? And I very much argued that yes, but specifically non-fictional pieces of work should be used rather than The Boy in Striped Pyjamas, which is a terrible example of Holocaust literature. And what this module sort of really taught me was about being a critical reader, and in terms of like taking everything you read with a pinch of salt, and very much being mindful of the ethics surrounding certain literature, and education, and the lack of education there is about the Holocaust and how wrong that is, and about genocide in general, really. And it was just such a powerful module to take. It was very moving. It was probably the most lively discussions that I've ever experienced on a literature module, which is great, because more often than not, I've mentioned this before on my channel, it's really disheartening when you're so passionate about literature and you understand that literature is meant to be about discussion, and yet you end up going onto seminars and just no one talks. It gets really tedious if you're the only person contributing, but at the end of the day, that's the whole point of literature, is to share your ideas. So I'm not just going to sit back and not say anything, because that's boring and it's not why I'm here. But for Holocaust literatures, it was completely different. Like, literally everyone had so many interesting points to make, and the discussions were always lively, and our lecturer was amazing. This is like her specialism. This is what she's studied for years and years and years. We had a Holocaust literature film week, so we even looked at Holocaust films, sort of looking around the ethics of that. And obviously you have to consider, like, why is the director making this film? What is the purpose? Even the form of the film. So, like, we watched Life is Beautiful, although not for the actual one that we turned up to, but we had, over the Easter break, we were meant to watch Life is Beautiful. I can't pronounce the Italian. I've forgotten the Italian title. Is it La Vita Belle, or something like that? And The Labyrinth, I want to say. I'm going off my memory, and my memory's not the best at the moment. But and that one was more. The Labyrinth was more about the kind of the conspiracy of silence that was sort of going through Germany post-World War II. Where people just wanted to sweep the events of the Holocaust under the rug and not engage and not talk about it, despite the fact that there were Nazis who were very much still in positions of power. They went back to their old jobs of being like lawyers or police officers, and all this really corrupt, horrible things that were going on. And The Labyrinth is about one young lawyer who tried to push for change and tried to hunt down former Nazis and actually bring it to the light and sort of say, this is wrong, we need to start making what happened a criminal offence, because obviously a big thing to do with the conspiracy of silence was also the fact that back during the Holocaust, so during World War II, when the Nazi Party was in power, all the atrocities and stuff that were happening, they weren't war crimes, which it like kind of throws you a bit to get your head around that fact. But all those horrific events that happened at that time, they were not considered war crimes. It was acceptable. So then when you get to the conspiracy of silence, it's all the younger generation starting to question, well, what did my parents do in the war? What did my grandparents do in the war? Like, and then obviously trying to get that justice and actually being like, no, these were war crimes. It's not acceptable. So that was kind of some of the films we looked at. And then apart from that essay assignment, we also had a group project, which was really interesting. We got given a text. We were divided into groups. We were just randomly allocated a text, and I was really lucky because I ended up with The Book Thief. And now The Book Thief, I think I've got a book recommendation for it on my channel, which would be completely different now that I've studied this module. It really challenged my preconceptions of what, like, because I've always had The Book Thief as like one of my favourite novels of all time. It's beautifully written. Marcus Zusak is a brilliant writer. But after studying this module, or at least looking at The Book Thief as a piece of Holocaust literature, I don't think it should count as Holocaust literature. And that was what our presentation was about. We had to sort of argue or analyse why we felt that our book was or was not Holocaust literature. And obviously The Book Thief is historical fiction, and the Holocaust is barely mentioned. Like, there are events concerning the Holocaust that are in the background, but it very much focuses on Liesel's character, and something that I was really passionate about and suggested that we do in my group was that look at the wider arguments surrounding this. So obviously The Book Thief was turned into a film. It's often known as like a coming of age novel. It's often marketed towards teenagers. But once again, with that lack of Holocaust education, it presents a real issue because it gives a very rose-tinted look at Nazi Germany. And that's not to say Marcus Zusak in his book, he doesn't shy away from the kind of inherent racism that was being taught towards the Jewish community. It definitely deals with that. But because it's from the perspectives, or it's more so focused on the young German character Liesel, we don't really get the full effects of that. And Max, and who is the young Jewish man they end up helping, which Hans probably helps because of a guilty conscience rather than actual genuineness, although Hans is meant to be a very kind-hearted character. Eric, who is Max's father, saves him during World War One. So there's that kind of grey area of like, if Eric had survived, would Hans still have been willing to help him? And I also looked into the idea of a collective public consciousness. So for a lot of people, because there is such a lack of Holocaust education, which is no one's fault, apart from the governors of education, not making it mandatory, it leads to gaps in people's knowledge, and then that means the general public tend to gain their information from books such as historical fiction novels, which are not the most accurate in the world. Especially like The Boy in the Striped Pyjamas, which I'll keep returning to because our lecturer was amazing and she literally hates that book. And that's the book that back when I was a student at GCSE level and just during secondary school, that is the book we read. And for a lot of teenagers, that is their whole Holocaust education encompassed, which is very inaccurate, and it's full of things that wouldn't be possible. Like an example is that, as our lovely lecturer said, there is no way that Bruno would have been able to he would not have been able to dig under the fence to get into Auschwitz, Birkenau, because the post rails went so deep into the ground, he physically would not have been able to dig a hole underneath it. There's just no way that would have happened. And many other inaccuracies. And also, it's just like, his father is meant to be like a high-ranking SS officer. There is no way that he would be an innocent child. There is no way he would not know what his father's job is. It's just stupid. And yeah, so for the group project, I ended up looking into this idea of collective public consciousness and how, due to the lack of education, people form very sentimental responses. And I used a particular reviewer, a customer review on Amazon, to analyse. And this lady, very much, she adored the book, but she was uplifting Hans's character and praising him, and basically taking the very rosy message of how there were many Hans Hubermans during the war, and it's like, no. And that even ignores the fact in the book that Death makes, because Death is our narrator for the Book Thief. Death himself says that Hans is a minority. Death himself acknowledges that Hans, in comparison to his compatriots and his fellow citizens, he's a rarity to willingly help a Jewish person. So when I found that review, I just thought, yeah, this is the issue. This is why it can't be Holocaust literature, because people take these historical fiction novels for truth, due to that lack of education, which isn't necessarily their fault, but due to that lack of education, they take it as truth, and then they spread misinformation, or they take sentimental messages and be like, oh yes, but look, there were lots of Hans Hubermans, and yes, there were people during the war who did risk their lives to help the Jewish community, but a lot of them didn't, which becomes very clear and apparent in Maus. Maus is another incredible sort of survivor memoir that we explored. It's a graphic comic by Arthur Spiegelman, but it's second generation, so he's the second generation survivor is the term that we use. And he sort of looks at and explores his relationship with his father, who retells his story of what happened to him. And it's incredibly powerful, and I highly recommend it. And obviously it goes without saying. And it goes without saying that even though it's a graphic novel, it is not for children. It's very violent, the depictions, even though their art does this amazing job of he zoomorphizes the characters. So the Nazis are cats, the Jewish people are presented as mice, and lots of different nationalities are depicted through different animals, but it's not, don't be fooled, it's not light-hearted, it's not for children, but then again, as our lecturer was also saying, it's not necessarily about shielding children. She believes very strongly that even young children should be taught about the Holocaust and genocide, and in a way I am inclined to agree, when they get to an age where they're able to sort of start having those discussions, and so long as it's done in a very sort of safe environment and in a space and in a way where they can ask questions, but it's not necessarily something that you would actively want to sit down and read with a child, because it is very disturbing. Obviously it would be, but it was just all the texts we read were just incredible and powerful, and every single one gave us like food for thought. But if anyone's listened to this, thank you. And if you have the opportunity at university, if you're going to study English literature, if there's a Holocaust module, I highly, highly recommend you take it. It's just given me so much appreciation and so much to think about, and a lot of empowerment and activism. Oh, and the other part of the group project we got to do was, it wasn't for extra credit, but it was just something that our lecturer always tries to encourage, was to make a creative element. So me and my group decided, where I love to write poetry, I decided to create a found poem from our favourite quotes from the historical novel, from The Book Thief. I compiled our favourite quotes into a found poem, and then I wrote a rebuttal to that, and then I ended the whole piece with copying and pasting a passage from L.I. Weasel's Night, and basically saying that the real words belong to them. The real words belong to the survivors of the Holocaust and those who perished and those who will never hear their stories. So it was just incredibly powerful, and yeah, so I highly recommend it. If you get the chance to study Holocaust literatures, just go for it. It was just, I can't rave about this module enough, and obviously not rave as in, it was very heavy, it was very emotionally jarring, but it's an incredible experience and I don't regret it. And we even had the opportunity to listen to Ruth Barnett, who was a survivor of the Holocaust, and I also went to another talk where there was a lovely lady called Dorrit, who was also a survivor, and just listening to these incredible women and their stories, it's just, it defies belief, their experiences. Anyway, if anyone's watched this, thank you, and I hope you have a good day. Bye.